Okay, everyone, thank you for showing up today and welcome to Novelty. I know a lot of you have joined us before, but for anybody new, Emily and I will be talking about some books that we have recently enjoyed, and you can see them up on the shared screen. And then afterwards, we would love if you would share anything that you've recently read and enjoyed, and we'll take notes and we'll email those additional titles to you after the discussion, so you can refer back to it. And Emily also emailed you the handout that is on your screen right now. So I can get started. My first book is called Finley Donovan is Killing It by Ellie Cosimano. It's a mystery. I don't know about you guys, but I really had a hard time reading pretty much anything in the beginning of COVID, and found myself really leaning towards lighter reads, and this definitely fits the bill. Finley Donovan is killing it, except she's really not. She's a stressed out single mom of two and a financially struggling novelist. Finley's life is in total chaos. The new book that she promised her literary agent isn't written. Her ex-husband has fired the nanny without telling her, and this morning she had to send her 4-year-old to school with hair duct taped to her head after an incident with scissors. When Finley's overheard discussing the plot of her newest suspense novel with her agent over lunch at Panera, she's mistaken for a contract killer by a woman named Patricia who's sitting nearby. And Finley inadvertently then accepts an offer to dispose of Finley's problem husband, of Patricia's problem husband for $50,000, money that she could really use. Soon, Finley discovers that crime in real life is much more difficult than its fictional counterpart, as she becomes tangled in a real life murder investigation. On the plus side, her nanny Veronica jumps back in to help Finley not only out with the kids, but with the crime. This book was fast-paced and witty. I found Finley's messy, funny, and heartfelt experiences to be very relatable. This is the first in a new series. So anyone who was a fan of Janet Ivanovich back in the day with her Stephanie Plum novels, this is sort of along that vein of humor and mystery. But I found it a lot more, fresh and relevant than the Stephanie Plum books. So that was Finley Donovan is Killing It.
And my first one is called The Dating Plan by Sarah Desai. I think this is perfect for summer. It's just an easy read and it's enjoyable. We meet Daisy Patel, and her life is in chaos after she catches her boyfriend cheating on her with her former boss, and also learns that her current company is in dire financial straits. Daisy can't take any more of what's going on, but mostly she can't take her parents' romantic meddling. Liam Murphy is set to inherit his family's distillery, but it is only if he gets married that he can have it. Liam, who Daisy had a crush on as a teenager, runs into Daisy and they come up with a brilliant idea. Why not fake a relationship and marriage in order for Daisy's family to get off her back and for Liam to inherit his distillery? Daisy agrees, only with the caveat that she gets to create a dating plan that will work to convince the families that their relationship is legit. While there are sparks flying between them, Daisy can't help but remember that Liam stood her up for prom years ago. He disappeared from her life that night and she was never able to determine why. With that hanging in the background, Daisy tries to keep a distance between her and Liam, but their chemistry is undeniable. Pretending they're in a relationship takes its toll, and especially when the feelings become real. Can they keep this charade up for their families? Will Daisy find out what happened that night 9 years ago when Liam disappeared? It's a fun, heartfelt rom-com and it's perfect for easy reading for summer.
Hey, my next book is a thriller. It's called The Good Sister by Sally Hepworth. So this book was perfect for fans of Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. And it's also on a lot of lists for like the most anticipated and big thrillers of 2021. So this is the story of two sisters, Rose and Fern. And from the outside, everyone might think that they are as close as twin sisters can be. Rose is the responsible one with a home and a husband and a fierce desire to become a mother. Fern is the quirky one, the free spirit, the librarian who avoids social interaction and whom the world might just describe as truly odd. But the sisters are devoted to each other after surviving a childhood with their sociopathic mother, and Rose has always been Fern's protector from the time they were very small. Because what happened was that years ago, Fern did something very bad, and Rose has never told a soul. When Fern decides to help her sister achieve her heart's desire for having a baby, Rose realizes with growing horror that Fern might inadvertently make choices that can only have a terrible outcome for the baby. What Rose doesn't realize is that Fern is growing more and more aware of the secrets that Rose herself is keeping, and that their mother might have the last word after all. This book was spine-tingling, creepy, a total page-turner, and very unpredictable. The Good Sister is about the ties that bind sisters together and about the madness that lurks where you least expect it.
Okay, my next one is The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. And it's very much a novel about social and political American history. It covers the Great Depression, but it focuses on the environmental disaster that coincided with the economic depression and the huge shift of migration from the agricultural interior to the West Coast. But while it does talk about all those things, it is also a story about love lost, the relationship between mother and children, the strength of female friendships, and also the strength and resilience of women in general. We meet Elsa in 1921 when we learn that her homely appearance and lack of skills are criticized by her entire family. Feeling that she has to do something big, she goes out one night in a new red dress and ends up being romanced by Raffi Martinelli. A few months later, she realizes she's pregnant. She is kicked out of her home and forced into marriage with Raffi. Years later, in 1934, Elsa has a life working on the family farm with the two young children. She loves her husband, but she can never quite get that communicated to him, and she doesn't feel that he feels the same way. Eventually, one night, Raffi abandons them, most likely headed to California, where most of the country was going during this time. And eventually, the dust storms and the drought are too much for the family farm. Elsa decides to head west to California to try their luck with her two children. California is no picnic, and she struggles to remain afloat when everything is working against her. She depends on new friends, and they suffer and they struggle together. There is some focus on the mother-daughter relationship as they struggle to make a life for themselves, and the relationship is more powerful than Elsa had ever realized. The family struggles through poverty, unemployment, floods, and they still fight to make a life for themselves. It is a sad story, but there are small glimmers of hope that shine through when you least expect it.
It was a really good book.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I didn't really know much about like the Dust Bowl.
No, not at all.
I mean,
it was really interesting.
Very interesting. Okay, so my next book is historical fiction. You know, there's never seems to be any lack of titles, but they keep, coming out with new topics. And I thought this was a really great one. It's called The Paris Library by Janet Charles. World War II Paris during the German occupation forms the setting for this coming-of-age novel. In 1939, Odile is the daughter of a police captain in Paris. She's just finished library school and landed her dream job at the American Library, which serves both foreigners and Parisians. She falls in love with one of the police officers her father brings home for dinner as well. As the war proceeds and the Nazis take over the city, she fears for her twin brother, who's been captured by the Germans, places herself in danger over and over again by transporting books to Jewish patrons who are forbidden to visit the library, and begins to question some of her boyfriend's actions as a police officer. Odile's story is juxtaposed with that of a teenager named Lily, who in 1983 lives in a small rural town in Montana. Lily's curious about her neighbor, the mysterious Odile Gustafson. All Lily knows is that Odile lived in Paris during World War II and that she still speaks with a captivating French accent. In an attempt to get to know her, Lily decides to interview Odile for a school project that leads to French lessons and a life-saving friendship between the two females. In chapters alternating between 1939 Paris and 1980s Montana, Odile's past is revealed. The author herself worked at the American Library in Paris and uses the stories of real employees and library patrons in this excellent World War II read.
Okay. My next one's also historical fiction. It's called Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. It's very popular with book clubs right now. It is the 1580s in England, and we meet Agnes. She's an eccentric young woman who walks the forest with her pet falcon on her shoulder, and the people of the town whisper about her. She is gifted with healing skills, and she can read people's natures and foresee their futures with a single touch. When she meets Will, the local tutor, she sees greatness in him. They fall in love and mean to marry, but their families will not allow it. Agnes decides to take matters into her own hands and gets pregnant. And then she moves in with Will's family at his family's home. Over the years, they have 2 children together. Will's father is abusive towards Will and causes Will to live in the shadows, but Agnes knows that there is greatness in him. And until Agnes convinces Will's father that he would do better she convinces Will's father that he would do better working for the family business in London. Over the years, Will's visits become less frequent as his life becomes the one he is meant to live by writing plays. Agnes always meant to go out and meet him out there, but it never happened. They had a daughter, Judith, who has, her health isn't the greatest, so they were always afraid to move her. Well, the plague falls upon the family, and Agnes knows that one of her children is going to die. She has foreseen that when she dies, she only has one child at her graveside. I was going to say I don't want to give away too much, but in the description on the handout, it tells you who dies, so I guess I can just tell you what happens there. Judith becomes sick, and we're all convinced that it's going to be Judith who dies, but it takes a turn and it's Hamnet. After Hamnet dies, Agnes resents Will because he doesn't come home. He just stopped coming home, and she doesn't even know if he is grieving. And at the end, after Hamnet dies, Agnes travels to London to see that her husband presents a play where he has turned his grief into art. And Hamnet obviously is Hamlet, but it was named after Hamnet, who had died.
Okay, my last book is a nonfiction title. It's called We Came, We Saw, We Left, A Family Gap Year by Charles Whelan. And this was, I think I read this book back in January, and it was so great. It's a travel memoir. And so for anybody who's been missing traveling, this was great. And it was just really fun and funny. And it asks the question, what would happen if you quit your life for a year? In 2016, Charles and Leah Whelan, inspired by their own youthful travels, embarked on a 9-month globetrot with their 3 teenage children and called it a family gap year. To make the trip affordable, they rented out their home on the East Coast while they were traveling and lived on a strict daily budget while on the road. They also found temporary homes for their pets. And to make it even more challenging, they actually homeschooled 2 of their 3 kids during the trip. The Whelan family adventures included riding on horseback through an organic coffee farm in Colombia, swimming in a river in the Amazon, and a safari in the Serengeti. But there was also vomit from the top bunk of an Indian train, parasitic disease, and many, many temper tantrums and family fights. So this was just a really real, I don't know if it was a cautionary tale of traveling around the world with 3 teenagers, but it was just a fun, fast, and insightful read. And so it was just a great way for me to travel the world during the pandemic.
My last one is The Invisible Life of Addie Larue. It's a little bit of historical fiction with a little bit of magical realism. In France in 1714, we have a girl, Addie, who's in her early 20s, and she's about to be married off to a much older man in her village. Desperate to prevent this from happening, she makes a prayer to the gods that answer after dark, and she ends up making a deal with the devil. She will no longer have to wed this man in return for her soul at such time as she is done wanting to live. Her curse for this is that no one can remember her, and she can live forever if she chooses. She doesn't realize this has happened until she tries to go back home, and her mother doesn't know who she is. She begins talking to her mother as if she were a stranger. Her mother goes in another room. She comes back in, and she doesn't remember Addie again. So anytime someone is with her and they leave, or they go in another room, or they don't see her for a minute, she disappears from their memory. Once Addie is out of sight, well, oops, I did that one right. Anyway, she lives through 300 years, and they talk about her different relationships that she's had. They're always temporary, because anytime she spends time with someone, you know, if it's hours at a time and they go to sleep in the morning, she wakes up and they don't remember her anymore. And she also has meetings with the devil, and they play off each other, trying to see who, because Addie is convinced she will never give him her soul, and he's convinced that she will. So they're always playing off of each other. She tries to get a piece of her remembered in people's art. She finds herself over the years in paintings and songs, so she's not totally forgotten, but she's still unknown. One day she meets Henry. Henry is a boy from a bookshop where she tried to steal a book, but she didn't get away with it because he could remember her. After all this time, one person finally remembers who she is. How can this be? And how can the devil allow this to happen? Where have the rules changed, and what is so special about Henry? That is those. We do have on the back of the handout, if I can get this to open. Okay, really quickly, we're not going to go in them in too much detail, but these are all TV shows that you can watch on TV that are based on books. On Stars, there's Discovery of Witches. It's about some academic scholars. There happen to be a witch and a vampire, and there's an ancient text that they find that they need, that supposedly tells them all about witches and vampires and demons and where they came from, and everybody wants to get their hands on it, so they're fighting people who want to get it from them. And then there's The Duke and I, which is Bridgerton, which is a steamy romance. It's lovely. They also do a fake relationship to get people off their backs for marriage, but of course it turns into a real romance. The Queen's Gambit is about an orphan. When she's 8 years old, she's in an orphanage, and she learns to play chess with the janitor, but she happens to be an absolute genius. And it's about her journeys through national competitions. And then the last one is Stealing Home by Cheryl Woods, which is the Sweet Magnolias show on Netflix. And it's just a nice romantic comedy. I don't even say it's a comedy, it's just a romance in Serenity. That's the name of the town. And this woman, Maddie, and her friends are creating a little spa. Her husband ends up leaving her for a younger woman. She ends up falling for the coach of her son's baseball team. It's very quaint, but it's a very cute, a cute show. Let me unmute everybody, because I think I muted everybody. I have to ask everybody to unmute. You can unmute yourselves, please. Sorry, I thought I could do it, but I have to ask everybody to unmute themselves. So if you have anything you would like to share, please do so now, and we will let you know at the end.
Oh, I do.
Email. Yep, go ahead.
I do. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have been reading this book, The Miracle Morning. The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. And this is a book, it's supposed to transform your life. What you do in the morning, the very beginning, the first hour, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. The first hour, what you do is the most important thing. The not so obvious secret guaranteed to transform your life before 8 a.m. This guy started getting up at 5 a.m., but you can get up at 7 or 8 a.m. And what you do that first hour, he did 6 things for 10 minutes. One thing was meditate, 10 minutes. One thing was to read something for 10 minutes. One thing was to give yourself positive affirmations like, I'm great, I'm the best person in the world. You know, you could make it up. Everybody loves me, I'm really good gardener, I'm good at articulating. You know, you make it up. You say nice things about yourself, because when you go out in the world, people might, you know, try to bring you down for whatever reason. But there was other things. He did 6 things for 10 minutes, and that took up an hour. And the book tells you what the 6 things were. And after he did this, he started just looking forward to getting up in the morning, and he was more productive. He got more done at home and at work. And it's supposed to enhance all areas of your life. You know, your work, your relationship. It's supposed to help you with everything. And so it's really a good book. It's worth reading, and it's an easy read. And it also says when you go to bed at night, sing something positive. You know, don't go to bed thinking you're mad at your neighbor, or this one doesn't like you, or something happened at work, or the weather's too hot. Think something positive when you go to bed. When you wake up, then you have positive energy. So this is a good book.
Have you tried any of it yet?
I have been trying some of it. I've been and it says to go to bed at the same time, wake up. I give myself positive affirmations. I meditate or just be silent and deep breathe, you know,
Mhm.
you know, and it also said, somebody told me, when you breathe in, say, I did my best. When you breathe out, I leave the rest. Inspiration, I did my best. Exhalation, when you breathe in, I did my best. When you breathe out, I leave the rest.
I like that.
I
Very
do.
cute.
It's
Very
easy.
good.
And it helps. You could say that, you know, when something bad's happening to you or you're feeling comfortable, just say to yourself, I did my best. And then we exhale, I leave the rest.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Very,
sharing.
very inspiring. Very inspiring.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm a morning person. I'd like to talk about a book really quick. I have a virtual book club with my lady friends from Florida, and we've been meeting every month, trying to find good books to talk about. And this book was called The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I don't know if anybody has read that. It's a story about Nora. She's a 30-something woman who is regretful about her life and feels alienated and unneeded in the world. In the depths of her wallowing, she's thinking of committing suicide. She comes across the Midnight Library. And in it, each book represents a portal into another variation of what her life could have been. As she reads the volumes, they allow her to access different versions of her life and relationships she could have stuck with and careers she could have pursued. As she jumps in and out of these alternate realities, Nora's journey of self-discovery results in a life-affirming and reflective story about the choices we make, the paths we've chosen, and each of our places in the world. And I found this book, some people thought it was depressing, but I found it made me more aware, because you all know you've all had choices along the way, and you kind of wonder sometimes, what if I would have married this guy, or what if I would have went to college, and this really puts things into perspective. And I think in the end, I think it's a very positive book, the choice that she made, how she accepted her lot.
Who's the author? Who's the author of The Midnight Library? I didn't get that. Who's the author?
Matt Haig, Haig.
It's a really good
Thank
book.
you.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Thank you.
One of the books I read.
Carolyn, you always have something to share. Do you have any books that you've read that you've liked?
I've had a couple. Two of them are historical history. The Girl from the Channel Islands. It's all set in 1940, and it's about a Jewish girl who fled from Vienna, and 2 years earlier, and she got stuck on on the island. Her only hope was that she didn't get caught, and she was just there. And she has a relationship that she develops with one of the German officers. And the diaries and information have come out about that, based on a true story of this woman, Addie. She escaped persecution, and she fled to Jersey and the Chain Islands, where she lived and worked in peace for 2 years. So there's diaries that have come out 60 years later, telling her story and her romance with this German officer who actually saved her and another Jewish lady. They were there the whole 5 years that the Nazis were there. He was supplying food and hiding in an attic, and it was almost like an Anne Frank sort of story, but she was able to get away, and they developed a relationship that continued. So it was an interesting story. And they talked about, we don't really know too much about what happened in Jersey Island, other than the Nazis moved in, but they talk a lot about the starving and malnutrition and the sickness that all took place there because of the lack of food. They were cut off from any outside sources. So I like that one. Also, there's another one called The Rose Code by Kate Quinn. That was interesting. These three translators from different backgrounds that went to that Belchi, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, park, in which they were trying to crack codes. So that's an interesting one. I read that back a couple of months ago, so my recollection is not too good now. I don't have long-term, but I read, did I tell you who the girl from the Channel Islands was? By Jenny LaCote is the author. The Rose Code is by Kate Quinn. And one I just finished that really creeped me out was Every Vow You Break by Peter Swanson. And it was just this, it comes from a kind of a theatrical family where they had like a summer theater, which their daughter was involved with and their family was involved with, and they had all these plays, and she had many romances that were not successful and disappointment with the men in her own family, her mother and father. After she went to college, their marriage dissolved. So she meets this guy, and this is a psychological thriller. You've got to like psychological thrillers. And a bride's dream honeymoon becomes a nightmare when a man with whom she has regrettably had a one night stand on her girls' gathering before the wedding. And he's kind of like stalking her to this remote island that her husband, who's very, very wealthy, sets this up. But he set this whole thing up testing her. So it's kind of macabre in a way, that they are all men on this island except for two women, and their husbands are planning to kill them. So it's an interesting one if you want to get into it. Oh, good. So that's that one. And that was by Peter Swanson. I really got into that boy, and I read that boy straight through. Boom. One day it was done.
This is Jan Lauerman. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Jan, we can.
Thank you. That sounds a very interesting and good read.
It was such a twist. It goes all the way to the end. You kind of suspect it is he's such a loving, caring guy and all of this business. And they have this elaborate wedding, and he pays for everything and all. He gets her on this island, and then this guy she had this affair with,
Right.
with her girlfriends before the wedding, he shows up there and she doesn't know what to think of this whole thing. And it kind of evolves. And it's right to the very last, I would say 1/5 of the book, do you suspect it's the husband? It's really a creepo.
That's called is that called Every Vow You Break? Is that what you said?
The title of it is Every Vow You Break.
Thank you.
By Peter Swanson.
I just had I have actually read Hamnet, and that is one of my absolute favorite books of the last year to read. I've not read any of Maggie O'Farrell before, but it's so beautifully written. It's a page turner, even though you kind of know what's going to happen. Interestingly, Shakespeare's name never gets named. It's just he, the brother, the father, the son. But of course, you know who it is. But it's just really well done, and you feel like you're in Elizabethan England. I mean, it's the way she transports you into the history. And apparently, it's it's true that Hamlet were the one and the same. And you know he's going to die, but it's about love and grief and family. It's just a really wonderful read. I really recommend that. The one that we just read in my book club last night, and I enjoyed it. It depends on how much nonfiction you enjoy. I have a hard time saying this. The Feather Thief. I can't get my tongue around it. By Kirk Wallace Johnson. And it was written it was published about 3 years ago. And also English, although the author is American, but it's set in England. It's a true story of a young man who breaks into an annex of the Natural History Museum out in the countryside in Tring, where actually my sister lives, strangely enough. But anyway, not in the museum, but in the town. And he breaks into this museum, and he's caught. You know kind of the story when you started, to steal all these exotic bird feathers that biologist also called Wallace brought back, and he sells them because this young man wants money basically to buy a flute because he's at the Royal Academy of Music. He's an American himself. It's a very intriguing story, and it's written in 3 sections. And the first section is all about feathers and why these feathers are so prized by salmon tyers, which is what he stole them for, but also the whole history of wearing feathers in fashion. It's intriguing. And the second part is basically the story of the theft that this young man managed to break into the museum at nighttime. And the third part is sort of the author seeking him down, interviewing him, looking at what happened to him, his penalty. He wasn't actually imprisoned at all. He got off with it. He ended up playing in Germany. It's very interestingly written. Sorry? It's a very, sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I think she was talking to somebody else. You're okay, Jan.
I'm sorry, my husband.
Oh, sure. But it's I mean, I enjoyed it. I love reading about the first part, the history of feathers and feather fashion and stuff like that. And by the way, you can find this young man on YouTube playing his flute and playing a piece by Metallica. He's in a Berlin orchestra now, the young man who committed this crime. But it was quite interesting, and I think everybody really enjoyed it. But it's a nonfiction book. You've got to kind of like nonfiction. It's not something that's a page turner for a lot of people, but it was well done. The feather thief. I have a hard time saying that. The feather thief. You have to get your tongue around that one.
Thanks, Jan.
Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you that my favorite book of the summer or of the past year is this book, The Accidental President. It's by A.J. Baime, B-A-I-M-E. And it's the story of the 4 months between Roosevelt's death on April 12th and Harry Truman becoming president. It's 4 months until the surrender treaty with Japan is signed in August. Now, Truman had only met with Roosevelt twice. Yeah. From the time they were elected until Roosevelt died. He knew absolutely nothing about the atomic bomb. He had never been in any conferences or confabs with the president and the cabinet. And this is one, they call it the 4 months that changed the world. And when you read it, you realize how very much was on the line. And of course, no one thought Truman, could cross the street by himself because, they knew nothing about him. He was sort of this unknown that had become the vice president. He'd never been to college, came from a small town in Missouri, and absolutely astounded everyone with his guts and his ability to bring people together and his willingness to fight the fight. It's really excellent. And this writer is, he just takes you through it. I mean, it's not difficult reading, but it's so enlightening. I have another book, and go ahead.
I was going to say it's interesting because I'm watching Masterpiece program Atlantic Crossing right now. Okay, and in most of the show, they are showing them with Roosevelt sitting there in his wheelchair and with the princess, and Truman sitting there with them all the time. So that gave you the impression that the audience gives it the impression that they were closer than what your book is saying. So isn't that interesting? How they got history so wrong in that program.
Oh, everybody, I guess, you know, you can take some liberties on things like that, but that, I find that really interesting that they were together. It
Yes.
sounded in here, you know, they really never were.
Right.
It's a bit like watching The Crown and thinking you know the history of the royal family, but there we go. You know,
Right.
it's fictionalized.
Right, it's all fictional.
So I have another book, and this was given to me by a friend. It's called The Last Garden in England. The author is Julia Kelly. I can't tell you that I have read this whole book yet, but it's a beautiful book with a beautiful story. And it's like so many, it intertwines 3 different women in 3 different eras. The present day, 1907 and 1944. In 1907, designer was hired to build or to produce a magnificent garden for, what's the name of it? Highbury House in England.
Okay.
And it takes you through the life of this garden and the life of these friends. And it just, I'm dying to read it. And since I just finished The 4 Winds yesterday, this is next.
Sally, who was the author again?
Her name is Julia Kelly.
Julia Kelly, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought of you, Jan.
We seem to be having a lot of England going on right now with the book group. But anyway, thanks, Sally.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any books they want to share?
Too many to name.
Right, yeah. Okay, well, we'll get this list ready. It's a good list. We got quite a few today. And I'll get this sent out. I'll send out a link to this as well. So you'll get a link to the handout. You should have gotten that this afternoon. And then I will send a link to the follow-up as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right.
And we've been recording this program. It will also be on our website. I would say give us about a week for it to get posted online, and then you can share with anybody you want as well.
Thank you very much for doing this for us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
It's
bye-bye.
always fun.
Bye.
Here.
Well,
Thanks, ladies.
happy
Bye.